Garfield. If I could ask everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm going to ask Dr. Tracy to lead us in the pledge tonight.
Appreciate the honor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Tonight we have a different format than our usual Board of Finance meetings. This is about 6th or 7th year or so that we've held an annual capital planning summit. And the goal of this meeting is actually to have an open discussion or dialogue or forum, however you want to call it, regarding what the town's capital needs are going to be for the foreseeable future. Now, the goal is not to discuss specific projects that are not underway yet. When those projects come before us, they will be vetted by all town bodies, and votes will be taken. That is not the purpose of this summit. The purpose of this summit is to say, as we look with our crystal ball for the future years to come, these are the projects that we believe, based on best available information, are in the pipeline. And this is based on best available information, the economic impact to the town over the next 20 years because of these projects, as well as the projects that have already been approved and that are already underway. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of analysis. There's a lot of assumptions. And I'd like to thank Mr. Mayor and his team and Dr. Tracy and your teams for putting this all together, and Mr. Dwyer for your long-term capital planning or your long-term facilities plan, which is an integral part of this. I'd also like to recognize in the audience this evening all of the department heads that have come here to ask questions should they come up. Now, the way this meeting works is we have the Board of Finance and our members here, but we also have invited to the table with us tonight Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Pierce from the RTM, Dr. Tracy and Mr. Dwyer from representing the Board of Education, Mr. Timniak and Mr. Tetrol will be here representing the Board of Selectmen. Now, before we start, do we anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Mayor, who's provided us with a wealth of documents here, and ask you to lead us through what we have and how the discussion should flow.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you indicated, this has been an ongoing and annual affair, if you will. In fact, every once in a while it's a semi-annual affair because we kind of have a February recap every once in a while. But there are a couple of new documents this year that were not here in the past. So, and for those who may be new to the system, let me kind of explain what you have in front of you. I would like to start with the package that's on your table that was handed out this evening. I'd like to start with Exhibit 4. The exhibit number's in the upper right-hand corner. And this is the town's exhibit. When you go through the Board of Ed's exhibit, you'll find that it's more colorful, and but it's the same exact format. What you have here is you see there's a top half, the box is on the top, and the box is on the right. And each box is a fiscal year. The boxes on the top represent the anticipated year that a capital project will be submitted to a governing body for approval. So you see, like in the first box, the upper left-hand corner, you see the A, there's a column full of A's. Theoretically, these were all projects that were scheduled to be voted on fiscal year 16, i.e. the last fiscal year. And you can see that the phone system, under capital, you have the non-recurring capital items on top that have all been approved. On the phones, you'll see the phone system has a P, which means proposed. The RFP was not completed, so that was not voted on, brought to the town governing bodies as anticipated. And so this, again, the top by fiscal year indicates the projects that are going to be brought by the department heads to the governing bodies that fiscal year. The bottom represents the anticipated expenditure years. For example, it's pretty easy to go down to, again, the 15-16, the box on the left, lower left, and you can see the third line down there is Penfield Pavilion. Well, on the top, you can see it's in there at the approved authorized amount that was authorized at $7,446,999. And down at the bottom, you see for the fiscal year 16, it's $2,978,800. And then you go to the next fiscal year, 16-17, you should find it there, yes, $4,468,199. Because obviously, some projects take more than 1 year, some projects take more than 2 years, some projects take more than 3 years. Also on this page on the bottom, you'll have the expenditures, the amount anticipated to be spent, and also have any reimbursements that are anticipated on those projects. Now, sometimes reimbursements are in the same year expenditures, sometimes they're in future years. So when you get down, so what you have is capital project expenditures, you have the reimbursements, and that gives you a net cash flow per fiscal year. So now I'd like to go from this document to Exhibit 1. So if you look, the middle row is the towns. You see that the town's capital projects, less reimbursements, net capital projects, non-reoccurring projects, net less reimbursements. Then you have the total cash flow required for the fiscal year. And then you have the same thing going out to year 2026. It's a 10-year planning process. Obviously, you see fewer numbers in the later years because there's things that people haven't thought about. The top part is the Board of Ed, the bottom part, the middle part, the town, and then the bottom part is the total. That information then goes into Exhibit 5, the landscape. And we do is we take all this, we put it in a software package. It's kind of like we want our own written software package with our investment advisor. And we say, okay, based upon this cash flow, how much money do we need to bond? And as you can see, the box in the kind of like left center, we're looking, based upon this document, we're looking to bond $25 million in 18. Currently we bond every 2 years. We are looking to change that, but right now that's the policy. And we're going to do some work. We're looking at some different things to smooth out the debt service, so don't have the volatility, the pluses and the minuses, the plus million, the minus millions every other year. So you see, and we're looking for, based upon this information, 25.5 to be bonded in 18, 21.5 to be bonded in 2020, 15 million and 15 million each in 2022 and 2024. And if you go to Exhibit A, what this shows you is the anticipated total debt service. Now, as we just pointed out, these documents go out to years 2026. There would have to be, to cover all of these, there'd be another bonding in the year 2026. That is not on here, so when you look at the bottom total, you know, assuming nothing else changed, you'd add another year, 2026, and it would be about the same number because the debt service would approximately equal the amount that we would bond. So you can see, so anticipated 2017 is $211 million, and you can see that it is declining because I assume many of the school projects that we've talked about are over. Then you go to Exhibit 2. This document shows at the top the comparison of debt service projections a year ago today to today. You'll notice that 6/30/17 was projected last year to be $25,462,000, whereas we know now that 2017 is going to be $23,616,000. That is the benefit of the refinancing that we did in March. So you can see that based upon all this information, compared to last year, go down to the bottom, if you go through 2026, there's debt service savings of about $6 million. Then you can go down to the bottom half of this chart, comparison of September 2015 capital versus 2016. The capital plan amounts, you can see the total, grand total that we're looking at last year was 105 million, and now it's 90 million. If you go to Exhibit 3, this is a new exhibit. Every year, some things get added, some things get subtracted, some things get reduced, and I'm going to tell you that the words reduces and removes are not my words, but this gives you kind of a track. If you were here last year and there's something that you don't see this year, or it's to change, this gives you an indication of that. So you can see what was, the top half is increased, items increased, or moved from year to year, or reduced, and the bottom half is a combination of the new items listed first and then the items removed. If you go to Exhibit 6, you see the debt service as a percent of budget. Projected going forward, as you know, this is a number we tried to keep under 10%. You see it camps out in 2021 at 9.29%. The budget was increased at 2% per year, which may not be what's in the cards, but that's that's the number we used for conservative purposes. The second item that, or another item that's new this year, as you go to the end of your packet, you see Town of Fairfield Water Pollution Control Authority. Basically, go to Exhibit 7. You see there's 4 projects there that have a note under them, projects above, not bonded. These are projects that have already been approved by the town and the WPCA, and the funding is either grant funding, the funding is a combination of 3 things: grant, town, and WPCA capital account. Then you go below that, and you see, and it adds up to about $30 million. Doesn't have a total on this page. I apologize for that. You can see the cost. You can see the project on the far right, project identified, and the cost, the grant opportunities, and the net. And then if you go to, then we did the same thing. That would be Exhibit 8. But then you go to Exhibit 10, and you see that would, given that schedule, we did this a little differently because it's easier. It's one organization, many fewer items. You see that this would call for approximately $10 million, Exhibit 10, page 1 of 5, $10 million to be bonded in 2020. Another, the next page, $16 million in 2022, $4 million in 2026, and then $2.5 million in 2028. And then the last page would show the aggregate debt service of the 4 issues.
Now, Mr. Mayor, these are these numbers from the WPCA are not included in the roll-up of the
Correct
town and the
statement.
Board of Education?
Correct statement.
And that is because how they will be financed will be a discussion that'll be had at a future date, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the WPCA information is new information, and what we know is we have an upgrade to that facility that needs to take place in a number of years that committee is presently starting to work on. Is that a true statement?
Yes. And Mr. Michelangelo can speak to that with much more information than I can.
Okay.
And that's kind of it, so. if I-
Okay, so what I want to start with, if I might, is can you tell us a little bit about, so that we're all on the same page, the process that was gone through to come up with the town projects and the assumptions, the financial assumptions that you made in putting together the spreadsheets as well as the waterfall?
Yeah, we actually start in July, August timeline. We hold, the administration holds, well, we start the process in finance. Basically issue a notice to all the department heads that it's time for capital planning again. So we ask everyone to anticipate their needs. We ask them to divide it up into the, what would be considered non-recurring capital and capital, based upon the policies and based upon, you know, the guidance set by this board. Then we meet with everybody. We put a preliminary document together. That preliminary document then goes to the first selectman's office. Then the first selectman vets that document, and the first selectman meets with the department heads. Some things get reduced, some things get eliminated, some things get changed.
How are the numbers derived, Mr. Mayor?
The numbers are estimates based, I mean, based, I was going to start with, I could speak, the only one I can speak to specifically is the phone system. But the numbers in general are based upon, for example, well, dump trucks are going out of here, so that's not a good example. But like the bridge construction, the highway constructions, these numbers are based upon conversations with the department heads, with the engineers.
Is there an
to-
escalation factor put on for future years?
There is not an escalation factor put on by the Board of, by Finance, no.
Okay, so if there's increases in cost, this is based on current year projections, best available information based on department heads. If the department heads have allowed for the fact that something's going to increase or decrease in cost in future years, that would be factored in. Is that a fair statement?
It is, we ask the people to tell us how much they think it's going to cost in the year that the work is going to be done.
Okay. Okay. Other questions on the assumptions, the specific assumptions to the projects? I mean, assuming the department heads are the ones who prioritize the projects.
Correct.
And then those are vetted with the first selectman.
Correct.
Okay. In the waterfall model, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. DeWitt, please.
Just one quick question on Exhibit 3, which is great, by the way, because we always ask, did this move or whatever? So is it a fair statement, based on what you just said, that all the removes were department head generated? Removes.
I would have put it deleted, but,
Yeah, I like deleted better too, but.
or removed,
Delete,
but not removed.
remove or deleted, whatever you call it.
Right,
This
yeah.
means that
Yeah,
there was
the-
money in that year to do, for example, Lake Mohegan Cottage, and it's just gone.
Correct.
So is it a fair statement that the department heads removed?
It's a fair statement to say that department heads in conjunction with the administration, I would.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, if there's no other questions, can we briefly go through what are the assumptions that you made on the waterfall, just so that we're in terms of interest rates and things like that? All I'm trying to do, everybody, is get these financial assumptions out on the table, and then we can go into
Yeah,
individual.
we issued bonds this year at, the number is so low I can't remember it. It was like close to 2%. 'Cause we were fortunate. We, you know, sometimes you're lucky. We issued the week after the Brexit event,
Yep.
and long-term markets were, interest rates were taking a hit. But what we do is, we go to the Fed's funds probability analysis, the Fed's fund program. We look at a lot of programs. What do people think the interest rates are going to be in the future? And we pull them from like Bloomberg documentation and that type of thing, rather than, I mean, it's either that or just make them up. But yeah, but we try to use financial program information.
Okay, and can you
Like-
tell us what those assumptions were going forward? Not just how
Yeah.
you came up with them, but the...
Yeah, so for the 2018 bond issuance, we're looking at 3.5%. For the 2020, 3.75, and for 2022 and 2024, 4%.
Okay. And the timing of the approvals versus the expenditures, that's again done in concert with the department heads on when things can get done and things of that sort?
Correct.
Okay. Let me change gears for a minute here if there's no questions. And guys, I'm just steering to be efficient, so feel free. This is an open forum for discussion. I'm going to turn it over, Mr. Dwyer and Dr. Tracy, for the facilities plan. Can you tell me, have you guys been able to vet these documents and make sure that, based on best available information, this ties into your long-term facilities plan?
Our documents, not the town document, right? Yeah.
Well, yes, your documents, but I want to make sure that your documents are accurately reflected in the financial projections as well. So there's a document here that I believe is Exhibit 1, right, that has the Board of Education at the very top.
But looking at it, a couple of numbers, it appears that, I haven't tracked every number down, but it appears as though they track right on schedule.
We should have somebody probably in the superintendent's office. Just check that to make sure that you guys are on the same page,
absolutely.
if you don't mind. Can you tell me a little bit about the
Yeah,
process that you go
so
through?
our booklet is a pretty similar format to what we have done in the last several years. The projects that are in this booklet have been around for a while. This is, I think, the third, the June of 2015 is the third time the board has approved an official facilities plan. Our board approves the plan knowing full well that the next day it may change, because we consider it a dynamic document that establishes the basic priorities of the district and the known costs at the time, and that we have always worked with the town in trying to balance our project needs and the town's project needs to accomplish the goal of being, quote, under 10%. While the board adopts a plan about every 3 or so years, we expect changes to occur in it in the interim years, simply because the staff, in this instance, Mr. Cullen and Dr. Tracy, before that, Dr. Title, will make those kind of adjustments as may be required based on recent information.
Mr. Dwyer, realistically, how far out does your facilities plan go?
Well, it's a 10-year plan.
It is 10 years.
Well,
That's
there's a
it.
10-year plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Cullen, we do have a page in there for projects that are, quote, beyond the 10-year period? Yeah.
Okay.
So there is a page in here for projects that are beyond the 10-year period.
Okay.
It might be helpful for Dr. Tracy to just kind of highlight some of the specific changes that occurred in this document from the one that was in June of 15.
Let's hold off on that, but I agree.
Okay.
Okay, but let's go global, and then
Yeah.
we'll bring it down and go through your documents, if that's okay. All right?
So with that, are there questions on these documents that you'd want to
Yeah,
get
well, I want
out
to
at the
turn it over.
moment?
Does anybody have what I want to do is make sure that everybody understands the process that went through on the town side and the Board of Ed side to come up with these projects, the prioritization of the projects, and the finances of the project. So without going into any specific projects of the like, does anybody have any questions on the process that was undertaken here by the town or the Board of Education? All right. Seeing none, what I want to do before we move on is draw our attention to two documents that Mr. Mayor pointed out before, Exhibit 6 and Exhibit 5.A. If people can just pull those up. Right, and Mr. Mayor, you went out 10 years as well in your planning, correct? Correct. Okay, so if we look at Exhibit 5.A first, we can see that over the next 10 years, if this were to come through exact, which we know it won't, our debt levels are coming down, right? From about 211 million to about 133 million in about 10 years. Correct statement?
Correct.
Okay. Again, this won't come that way, but at least we're not going in the opposite direction, and it gives us some amount of flexibility as we move forward. Any questions or comments or observations? I'm just giving the big picture here at this point and making sure we understand it, or we don't.
I mean, I have an observation. If you go through the
Please.
town, if you go through what the town's projections are, as you get to the later years,
They don't have much.
projects that they have, there's no projects,
Correct.
hardly any projects at all. So that number's completely false number at the end. It's just what's known at this point in time. So that's not, it's not like we're planning on going to that number.
I take
Correct.
offense
We're
to
actually planning on-
completely false.
Excuse me?
I take offense to completely false.
Well, I mean, I think if we're looking at it, we can't look at that as being real number.
Well, we can look at it as
Look-
being as incomplete.
You can look at it as being a real number, as stated at the beginning of this meeting, based upon the information that we have today.
And we have a lack of information.
We have the
A
full
substantial lack of
we-
information
We
later
have the
years.
full information of what the department heads believe they need at this point in time.
Right.
I mean, I can concur absolutely that other projects are going to be identified. I can concur that this will probably be filled out over time. But I take a little bit of offense to the word false.
Right.
Best available.
I think it's hard
Exactly.
to estimate that we'll be at $133 million in year 2025.
Which is my point, that
fact,
we have flexibility.
Mr.
That's
Flynn,
absolutely correct.
can I ask a
Yes,
question?
please.
Mr. Mayor, would you say there's a trend? Can we say there's a trend that we're going down, that you project a trend in terms of we're funding projects now and that in the future we may not be funding as many?
Well, as we're all well aware, there's been a significant amount of, and there will be a little bit more of the Board of Ed, which is the bulk of our, the bulk of all our debt service. And so, yes, I think the trend is definitely downward slope.
If I may,
Please.
with Holland Hill and Mill Hill being the last, quote, two major projects, Sherman is the third phase that we have to finish, and I think everybody at this table knows that we have to do that in small bites because of the floodplain and all, and FEMA and all that. But with those two schools being the last two major projects, you can't anticipate what's going to be needed in buildings in past, let's say, 5 years from now. But we do, the 10-year student projection is about level at 10,000 students. So in the past, we've had to have major changes to accommodate enrollment, to accommodate the decision to go away from 65 portables down to about 5 portables. And so now that that goal has been achieved and we're looking at a 10-year enrollment leveling, I think it's probably fair to say that we do not have available information at the moment that would suggest that something's going to be major in the out years. But again, that's not a promise, that's just an observation. Best estimate at the time.
So what you're saying is that moving forward over the next 10 years, based on available information, you don't have any capacity projects coming up. You'll have renovation projects, you'll have things that need to be redone, roofs and the like, but you don't see capacity issues at this point over the next 10 years.
Once Holland Hill and Mill Hill are done, in terms of the two major ones,
Right.
and based on enrollment projections, I would say yes. The enrollment projections are for 10 years, but
Right.
they really are only really good for about 5 years, because that, you know that children have been born. And so therefore, years 6 through 10, it's a demographer's best estimate.
Which goes to Mr. Walsh's point that as we get further out,
Yeah.
this is less reliable
Absolutely.
information. Mr. Becker?
Yeah, so one is a request, and that would be for the Finance Department, if they can maybe pull maybe the last 5 years as an example of this comparison sheet, and we can sort of maybe look at historically how things have shifted as projects have layered in. So this sort of trail off, maybe we can kind of get a better idea of 5 years ago, okay, the trail off was this, but we're really here now, and just sort of see that. So that'd be just a request. This is basically this sheet from the previous 5 capital summits. I think on the,
I'm not sure I understand your,
so this document with the percentages, which is, so it's
percentage
Exhibit
debt-
6.
Percentage of debt service?
So if we could
Sure.
just get the previous
Yeah.
5, and maybe that would
Well.
just give us a better idea as to where some of these trend.
In arrears and trend line.
Yeah. At least that's the best we have, right, for maybe actual comparisons. The other thing is I think on the board of, when I look at these numbers, on the Board of Ed side, I look at it and I say a lot of these numbers, when you end up getting into the project, end up going up, but it's a very comprehensive plan that lays out a lot, with a lot of detail. I've always complimented you guys on this book and sort of how you guys have shifted that, and always kind of wanted the town to do something similar. They do it in more of the sheet format. On the town side, it just seems like when I look through the sheet on the town side, that a lot of projects that we've heard, even through budget season, just sort of popped up, hey, might be bonded, aren't necessarily in here, and then that's sort of, I think, that where we see that dip now, because it's light on, I think, quite a few projects, probably that add up. We get the smaller ones, but some of these bigger ones, I feel like, you know, we know that some of these things are going to come, and that, I think, is causing, you know,
What do you mean?
issues with
Give
this.
some examples, Dave. It's a good observation. Give some examples of projects that you think are not included on here.
Give me a minute, I'll go through it. I can come up with a few.
Yeah, no, that'd be very useful, because the goal is
Let
for
me
it
go
to be
through, because
comprehensive.
there are a few.
Good,
I'll make a list.
yeah. Okay. So, and I want to make something very clear, and this is what Mr. Walsh and I were just talking about. These numbers, though, for debt service, right, and debt levels, are exclusive of the WPCA issues, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so anything that was done on top of this that went towards the town side would increase this, and therefore lower our capacity based on where we are now and where this is going.
Correct.
Yes, please, Mr. Matola.
I remember we had a conversation about, I think this during budget seasons. For the WPCA, some of that will be paid by user fees, and some of it is paid through just by a general taxes. Is that correct? Isn't there a
Well,
percentage?
there's currently, the town has issued debt to build the
Right.
plant. Some of that debt is paid for solely by WPCA, some of it is paid for, the bulk of it is paid for by the town.
Okay.
That's a decision that was made then when they developed a new plant. I think that if you look at, and what most people tell you is that once the plant's built and its renovation, improvements, and maintenance, that is the responsibility of the users. So it's my anticipation that the final result would be that the WPCA will be paid, the bonds will be issued by the town to realize the town's rating and interest rate levels, but be covered by user fees on the WPCA users.
Well, we don't know that yet, right?
No,
There's the
That's why I said I
decision that-
anticipate.
Right, right. So, but, Mr.
There's going
Matola,
to
to
be
your
a
point, there's-
percentage of it by user fees,
well,
not,
we don't know that. That's a decision that has to be made.
we have to make that decision. or-
Correct. I just throw that out there
Sure.
because it's not, I don't think it's set in stone at
All
this
right.
point, how we're going to do that.
Gotcha. Can I ask one other question on?
Absolutely.
Is there, maybe I was dreaming about this a long time ago.
You need to get some new
I know.
dreams.
Exhibit 6, the debt service as a percentage of the budget. Is there a percentage number that our auditors like? Is it, I thought it was like 10%.
Under 10%.
Under 10, that's what I thought. Okay.
And that's the next thing I was going to point out, that this brings us to under 10%. But again,
Yeah, it's,
I think we need to request Mr. Mayor to get a follow-up document that merges the WPCA numbers into this so that we can see exactly what that does moving forward on both the debt service schedule as well as a percentage of budget. And thank you, Mr. Matola, because that's exactly where I wanted to go with that. Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Mayor, the last time we worked with WPCA on their large bond issue back in the, I thought it was the 90s, I might be in error, but was that a brand-new facility, or is that considered to be a major repair as well?
New facility.
New facility? Okay.
do you have any follow-ups?
Is there any definition between what's considered to be a new facility and what's considered to be a 20-something
Yeah,
million
I-
dollar, $30 million repair?
Yeah, I think, well,
big
it's
repair.
two comments and then a handoff. This item has been researched both legally and administratively and what's done in other towns. And the predominance of the information pretty much states that it should be that it should be covered by the users, similar to electrical bills, et cetera. But the person I'm going to hand this off to is Mr. Michelangelo.
Thank you, Joe Michelangelo, Director of Public Works.
Welcome, Mr. Michelangelo. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for being here.
And I'll just speak from a
Yep.
overall perspective, and once again, I don't set policy, but the whole reason why the WPCAs were created, sewer authorities in Connecticut and every state, is because traditionally, sanitary sewers were being underfunded. That's why New York Harbor, Boston Harbor were in the state they were in 30 years ago. So there was a shift to the paradigm of having users pay for the system who specifically benefit for it. So in the 4 years that I've been here, we had a number of capital projects, which we're fortunate to get grants for. And if the Board of Finance recalls, luckily it wasn't a tremendous sum of money because a lot of them on the order of 75% reimbursements, 55% reimbursements. But on the 4 capital projects we had since I've been here, the ad hoc agreement was just a 50-50 split of the share between the general fund, ad valorem taxes, and the sewer user fees. So that's what we've used in the last 4 years that I've been here. And the largest, the last capital, large capital project, which Mr. Mayor referred to, I would classify that as a new facility on the south side of One Rod Highway, Richard Wright Way. All those tankage you see on the south side or on the left as you drive in, that was our tertiary treatment. That was the final treatment with disinfection, final settling. So that was all new. That was sort of like a additional stage to our plant.
Okay, so new is basically if you just have never had something before, and repair is if you have something and then you add on to it, even if it costs 10, 20,
Yeah.
30, 40 million bucks.
Yeah, but once again, in just about all of the work that we're doing in the future, on our, and our capital items identify even 20 years out, those are basically the rebuilding of existing facilities. So, all of our pump stations, our main trunk lines through town, and our wastewater treatment plant.
Okay. So you would see all this going forward as repair?
I wouldn't call it repair type items. You're actually rebuilding rebuilding the existing facilities, and in some cases you're increasing the capacity and the the resiliency of it, more flow, et cetera.
Walsh for terminology, perhaps not new.
I guess we're
Replacement.
talking, in regards to how we're thinking about funding this, and this is kind of a large number, I guess I'm trying to get definitional terms down for, Mr. Mayor said that his predominance of evidence that he's found so far is that new would be paid by the town, whereas repair, I'm using his words, would be something that would be more paid for with bonds from the users. And I'm just trying to figure out what's the difference between a new and a repair. And so far what I'm hearing is that unless we move into a different area with new things, that's new. Anything we add to capacity, we do repairs, whatever,
And
that's repairs.
and if I might,
Yeah.
I would just point out that, you can find examples throughout the state where things are done differently. So what Mr. Mayor said is that's the predominance of what they found. Mr. Michelangelo said the same thing in his experience, that's what he's seen. But it's not black and white, there's not a regulation or a state statute we can turn to, so at some point, it's something that we have to decide how we want to do it in Fairfield.
What our definitional terms are going to be.
Correct.
Okay.
And can I,
And that's what I'm trying to seek out. As part of my answer, I was going to get there, but whatever.
yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're actually talking about and what that discussion goes to is actually the funding mechanism, whether it comes out of tax dollars or whether it comes out of fees.
Correct.
And the fees would come out of a lower base of people that actually use it, where the taxes would come out of everybody in town. Well, except the institutions that do not pay taxes, such as Fairfield University and
Or
Sacred
the
Heart
s-
University,
or
would
the
pay
s-
fees.
Or the state.
Or the state, right.
The two biggest users are the state,
Yeah, Fairfield University.
Fairfield U.
Right.
So that's that piece. The other principle in this discussion would be the WPCA Commission.
Right. And the question, and I want to go back on something you said that I just want to make sure I'm clear on. And you said something a little bit different, Mr. Mayor, I heard it different. Regardless of how we decide to pay this off in the future, this will be done through bonds issued under the full faith and credit of the town?
That would be my most likely thought, yes, sir. Doesn't have to
Okay.
be that way. The WPCA does have the authority to issue bonds.
Right. So whether or not it's new or replacement or
Still need the
rebuild,
schedule.
it should be on the waterfall schedule, it's part of our debt service, and then the funding mechanism is a separate issue, TBD, once we know more of the information. Is that a fair, do I have that correct?
I think that's a reasonable approach.
Obviously, with respect to the rating agencies, it would be broken out.
Okay. Mr. Becker?
So if WPCA took this on and it didn't go through the town, you're saying, I mean, for instance, it wouldn't affect the 10% number, it would actually ride completely outside of that? Or do we still have to back that in?
No, I'm saying that if you build the schedule with it all-inclusive, then it would impact the number, but with the rating agency discussions and conversations, it would be separated. It would be there, but it would be identified.
They would allow
So we'd
that
be
it
able-
was.
They would understand what it is.
We'd be able to go up to the 10% as an example, and then go 1% or 1.5, whatever it is
Yeah,
on
it
top of
wouldn't-
that.
you're right,
And it wouldn't be a part of.
Yeah,
Basically be a disclosure item.
Yeah,
correct.
it's a separate revenue source to the extent that we choose to use that. So from the rating agencies, when they look at that 10%, they're looking at that as part of your operating budget, and how much of your operating budget are you chewing up with debt service? And that's kind of the constraint. They don't,
Yeah, no,
when they talk about it, they talk about it in terms of financial flexibility.
Correct.
And those are the terms they use. So if you had, because they assume that property taxes and fees are your only revenue stream as part of your budget. If it's basically revenue that's not in your budget, then they would look at that with a little bit more flexibility, a little different, but that's part of the discussion there, and that's part of what we would describe to them as we go through that.
Got it. And we did talk, could have been easily 6 or 8 months ago, about WPCA representatives coming to us. I think this came up during budget. Them, Parks and Rec.
That's
There were
what
a
Mr.
few that
Mottola
we-
talked about, yeah.
So this, I mean, I think long before this stuff, just to get them in the room would be,
There's no question, and this is the first
Yeah.
time we've actually seen, it's a valid point,
Yeah.
and this is the first time we've actually seen at this forum the capital plan for WPCA.
yeah.
So as soon as we're ready to get a full presentation on this, Mr. Michelangelo, we need to get that on the calendar so that we understand it.
Yes, and I would point out just that Selectman Timniak is a member of the WPCA, so we have at least a representative from that board here. And certainly Mr. Michelangelo worked closely with him in that take. But having the chair and the official representative of the board come before us is certainly a good idea.
Thank you. Any other questions on that right now? We'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Not WPCA.
No, but it's on, we're looking at schedules, I'm trying to keep it at the macro, schedules 5.A and schedule 6.
Okay.
So go right ahead.
In Exhibit 6, with the, and obviously I think the refinancing's probably
Thank you, Mr.
helped with
Michelangelo.
that. But with trying to stay under the 10%, I think these numbers were higher last year. Some of these numbers, Bob, am I correct? Some of the numbers in the furthest column to the right on Exhibit 6 were a little higher last year. refinancing.
Yeah,
so-
the refinancing saved us, so, I mean, I don't remember the numbers,
Yeah.
but that would make sense, yes.
Is there, other than the refinance, which I think is a great thing that was done, so I want to give credit where credit's due, but is there, I guess, a strategy or by the administration to try to bring this down, these numbers down to lower levels? I'm not talking about just, are matters being pulled, things not being added on, to try to bring this number down to
I don't think there
where
was,
it's 8% as opposed to closer to 10%?
I do not, no, I did not attend all the meetings. Members of my office, my staff did, with the department heads and Mr. Tetral, but to my knowledge, the conversation about projects and timing of projects did not include any conversation about how it would impact the debt service schedule.
Yeah, let me address that directly. No. I mean, the question the department has, what do we need? How we do it. Now, there's some caution as we go through, and how do we balance it out? And so, in general, everybody understands we're trying to balance that out, and not do everything in the next year. But this chart that you're looking at, Exhibit 6, is something that's produced for this workshop. It's not something that is produced ahead of time or managed to in that sense. Now, if this showed 11, 12% or something else, that would certainly go back and be cause for re-examining where we are. But we're not managing it to it in that degree. We're trying to make sure that we take care of the town and invest in infrastructure as we need to, because the cost of not doing that, as you well know, is much higher.
Yes. I will say I like where the numbers are and where they seem to be at least going, except, a couple of the out years where we're above 9. Because I'd like to keep some flexibility. I mean, in essence, this is the town's credit card. I mean, and I don't want to seem like we're maxing it out at 10%. I'm trying to like there to be a little wiggle room in case something popped up out of the blue.
and that-
And specifically, such things as, I don't know where we're going with the WPCA situation, and we're in obviously the very early discussions of that, and what impact that would have upon these numbers could be, could change them drastically just in some of the outer years.
I also know one of the other considerations we're doing, is your hand raised, or is it just, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's part of the process that we've gone through, and certainly we've seen it with the Board of Ed, where we have moved projects as some projects have gotten bigger than we anticipated, or that were in the long-range plan. We've adjusted other projects. So in the approach is to make sure that we are keeping within some semblance of a level forecast on the debt service, so that number is not going up. We do very definitely look at the waterfall chart and look at what the annual debt service number is to make sure we're tracking to that. Now, the natural occurrence, if the budget goes up and debt service number stays flat, then the percent is going to come down. So to that degree, you might argue we're managing to that. But we are not sitting there saying, let's not do this project because that's going to drive us from 7.9% to 8.1% on a debt, because the rating agency clearly have said that we have plenty of capacity to borrow. We are choosing not to borrow up to what they would let us do. But if you go back and read the rating agency reports, they clearly say that we have plenty of capacity to borrow. We are choosing not to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. At the risk of repeating what you said, I was going to point out that the waterfall schedule would take this into account if we managed to the waterfall schedule, so. Any other questions on Exhibits 5A or 6, which are really kind of the macro of where our debt is heading and where our debt service is heading as a percentage of the budget? All right, seeing none, let's turn to Exhibit 1 very quick. I guess I have to keep pointing this out. This is our net cash flow, and this does not take into account WPCA, correct?
Correct.
So this is what we need to fund in payments each year based on, or new payments each year. Or how do I describe this, Mr. Mayor? The grand total of the Board of Education and town cash flow. This does take into account all the projects that are approved and to be approved, moving forward. This is not debt service, this is payment to the contractors, is that correct?
Totally correct, totally correct, yes.
Okay, so this is cash flow required to fund the projects and not debt service in each individual year.
Okay. Payments to vendors minus anticipated reimbursements in
Thank
the
you.
year they're anticipated.
Thank you. Do we have questions, comments on Exhibit 1? Does everybody know what it represents? All right, seeing none, we'll put that to the side. Let's go to Exhibit 2. So this is a differential between what we looked at last year versus what we have before us now, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir, exactly.
And this is debt service versus,
The top part is debt service, and the bottom part is capital plan.
okay, so the capital plan at the bottom is the actual cash flow out to the vendors, net of reimbursement. The top part is the actual debt service costs for the next,
Yeah, it's the total of the 10 years, obviously, not the
Correct.
1 year.
but you have it by individual years in the first 10 years, correct?
Well, that in the other documents, but this is the aggregate amount.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is, over the next 10 years, you have in the
On the
capital-
top, yes.
260 million last year, 256 million this year. So we're better by about $6 million than what we thought would be in the next 10 years. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, is that because we're going to go through, that's driven by the next schedule, which is the differences in the removals? Is that
That's
correct?
driven, a significant percentage of that was
Oh,
driven
the
by
savings.
the savings on the
Refinance.
refi.
Yeah, how much of
Yeah.
that?
Well, certainly the whole 1,840,000 in the first year,
Yep.
and a portion of the 1,150, so 40% anyway, and then other going forward.
Okay, so about half of that or so of the 6 million is actual financing maneuvering as opposed to
Correct.
project maneuvering. Do people have questions specific to Exhibit 2? All right, seeing none, let's go to Exhibit 3, which might, thank you for preparing this. Would you step us through this? Because these are actual projects that have been moved, and I think this goes to a question, I think it was Mr. DeWitt. Did you ask the question over were the department heads involved in the moving and cancellation of projects? Wasn't that you?
My specific question was the removes, because
Right.
I frankly don't know why, if Mr. Tetro stated that we're not trying to hit, that the department heads aren't using the debt service as a percent of the budget as a guide,
Right,
why one department head would remove anything.
right.
I don't understand that, so.
Yeah, I think that, let me just answer it simply. I think that 99% of these were done by the department heads individually.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you want to step us through this schedule briefly?
Yeah, the top part is, the items that you have seen in the past that just have either been moved from one year to another because of timing or I have no idea why. I mean, the phone system, which is not on here because it was last year and it
It's not a
starts with
comforting comment.
with this
but
year.
okay.
Well, no, I mean, it's like, I'm saying like the phone system. The phone system, which was on, if this was a year ago, the phone system would have been moved from a year ago to this year because of the time required to put together the RFP and identify our system needs. But the specifics with respect to, why the Duck Farm Bridge was moved from 18 to 17 would require Mr. Michelangelo's input. The ladder truck, we just received delivery of one ladder truck, and I think we have another truck coming in. I don't know the exact reason for that though. Old Town Hall renovation, I think, has to do with decisions being made about IT and other aspects of operations. But that would be, I guess, a Mr. Tetro question. The new represents items that Mr. the fire chief wants. That says pumper 5, but I think that's a full ladder truck, actually. Is that correct, Mr. McCarthy, Chief McCarthy? Yeah, that's the Quint. So that's the Quint is new. The Chief McCarthy spoke to that eloquently at during the budget session. His thoughts and opinions on rescue trucks and evacuation trucks and pumpers and ladder trucks. The railroad bridge tide gates. I think a lot of this has come into play with respect to all the Storm Sandy and the ramifications of Penfield and everything else. The $200,000 for the fire station down there, there's been a lot of talk about what we're going to do at Southport Fire Station. There's ideas kicking around. So at some point we need to bring in some professionals to do an operational and engineering review to go through what's a good idea, what's not so good idea, and how much, and get some general ideas. And then that would be an item that, depending on if the town determines to renovate Southport Fire Department office building, or to build a new one, or that would be a number that would show up in the future. But at this point, there's just...
Well, wait, you've moved to the news?
Yes.
Moves from, okay. So
Yeah.
we were at the top. The tops are increases, changes, and moves from year to year, right? So those were existing projects that were identified in prior years that we've got better available information on timing, as well as expense, correct?
Correct.
Right, the bottom section are new projects that have been added in since the last capital planning summit, or projects that have been taken out of the capital plan on a go-forward basis.
Right, there's like 12 or so new projects and 20 or so removed projects.
Okay, and the removed projects, in general, I don't know, Mr. Tetro or Mr. Mayor, I don't know who should respond to this, but in general, those projects, what was the reason they were removed?
Yeah, that would have, like, for example, you have, and then this is drawing attention to a, kind of a mislabeling in the department, but you have new pumper 5 is the fourth line down, and then you go down lower and you have pumper 5 remove. That's because we're removing a pumper and adding a Quint. So it was the fire department's decision to change the apparatus that they want to purchase. So it's a different and separate apparatus. With respect to the renovations and the generators, I think you're better served speaking to the Department of Public Works.
Are there questions on specific line items in this area that people want to ask? Now, I don't want to delve deep, right? But if we have questions for the department heads, I'm going to go to Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Becker, and then I'll come over to Mr. Walsh.
I may be delving too deep, and I'll just stop, but I'm surprised when I see removal of cluster replacements, when that's something we've been talking about. That's IT, right?
Is that an IT one? I think that was, when we went through the budget process, we moved those to the cloud, I thought,
Correct.
based on discussions at this board.
Okay, so this is
So
the not
remove is-
having to buy hardware because we're going to move it into the cloud and not have to buy.
We
Is
can
that
certainly
correct?
confirm that, but that is my memory.
Yeah, that's good. Plus,
So the removes, or as Mr. Mayor would rather have it, delete, sometimes are changes, as in pumper E5, right?
right. Change in operations, change
I
in
think a
status.
substantial number of the removes would be a change of that sort, Mr. DeWitt, I believe.
Okay. Other question? I'm going to go to Mr. DeWitt. Are you okay?
Yep, thank you.
Let's go to Mr. Becker.
So, I mean, is this an error? I mean, but Turney and Riverside Tide Gates, I see a new, and then I see a remove. Is that a labeling similar to the fire department, or is that should have just been a change? 'Cause it seems like the numbers have changed, and that's actually gone up in the amount, but it's the same project listed. Towards the bottom of new.
Yeah, I see that there's 1116, and the remove is 600,000. I have no idea if there was a major renovational change there, or if it should have just be included in the increase. But it's a big difference. It's $500,000.
Mr. Michelangelo, would that be you to speak to that, or?
Mr. Carey,
Mr. Carey?
Conservation.
Hello, Mr. Carey.
Hello.
They passed the buck to you. Do you
Good
wanna-
evening. So that was it was more of an increase than a complete removal. And I don't know how much you want to get into it now, but there was a study done on all the tide gates. That's why you see some of the projects, a lot of them were removed from our department that were, smaller in nature, and a lot of reprogramming has gone around in the past year to look at each of these projects. So you'll see that a lot of the tide gates were added on throughout town based on a study that I commissioned engineering firm to do, because that's really the critical infrastructure that's managed through the Conservation Department that has immediate need. So some of this stuff, again, I know a lot of these removals are for mine, like Lake Mohegan Cottage. We had an architect looked at the old building that was up there, said it's beyond its useful life. So I went out and got a grant through CDBG funding to actually demo that. That's why you see the removal coming off of there. So it's really a lot of the removals through my particular issues just kind of reprogram, looking at things that had been on this waterfall schedule for years and saying, this is more of a priority.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we, going forward, it would be good, particularly for some of the larger items, and I see Mr. Becker, to actually get the reasoning on the schedule, just to the side, and it can just be a couple of words, but it'd be very nice to have that so that we could follow it. We could, so thank you. Mr. Becker, do you have a follow-up?
Well, and these may, I don't know if they fall under you or somebody else, but there's two more that strike me, and they're large too, so it's kind of like where'd they go, because we've been talking, so beach area flood protection at 5 million, and then downtown drainage improvement at 1 million, and both of those are falling off. That's 6 million, and I guess that kind of gets to my comment a little bit earlier, in that we kind of know that something massive is going to have to at some point be done, and I thought that part of putting some of these things on was planning that these things are coming. They're not 20 years out. They're going to happen. I mean, particularly in the beach area. So
Well,
what's the deal with this? How are we then kind of still going
Who
to
wants to
build
handle
this
that?
in for
Specifically those
planning
two.
purposes?
Yep. I'll take one, and I think Joe can take one.
Thank you, Mr. Carey.
I need Mr. Carey up here. I thought we were still staying with Mr. Carey and these tide gates, but
Go ahead.
Well, I don't.
let's,
I'm more asking, does this fall under?
Well, Mr. Becker had the floor, so
that's fine. I just want him to stay up here at the table. I have a number of questions.
go ahead.
And, yeah, I'll just comment on some of those larger projects. So that's one of the issues about going, many years out. I wouldn't call these projects, pipe dreams, but as they get 5 or 6 years out and they're large projects, we really don't have an idea of the scope. That 500 and 1 million are, they were very vague placeholders. We don't know the amount of grants involved.
Well, that doesn't mean you take them off the schedule.
Correct, but
So did you
that's,
take them off the schedule?
well, once again, they were taken off, and when we were reviewing them, that was one of the problems with the out years. We don't know
Well, to
what
Mr.
grants
Becker's
are
point,
involved.
does that mean we're not doing them, or does that mean we don't have a placeholder in here for them now?
Well, there is still engineering studies going on various projects,
So are
but
we going to have to spend money on these, or no?
there is an uncertainty whether they come to fruition or not.
Mr. Tetra, do you want to follow that?
Yeah, in terms of the $5 million one, the issue is that's not a defined project. It's not something that we know that there's no kind of defined project that has a scope or that has something in deep approval. There are certainly plans and thoughts and designs, and the question becomes, at some point, at what point do they get on here? If it's somewhere between 5 and 50 million, what do you put on here? Or it may be 0. If we don't get a grant for it, we're not spending a substantial amount of money, and if we can't get something that's deep approved in terms of how that is, we found that DEEP has some rather strict guidelines.
Something about Penfield, as I recall.
Yes, no question. We had the bulkhead discussion there. And so if we're going to put something on here, it's got to be something that, in my mind,
Well,
is a plan or a vision or something that we might be able to do.
But it was on here in prior years. I mean, I guess, once it gets on here, in order to get off, it's got to be, we're not doing it, or we've got better available information, not that we're in an engineering study. Because right now, it looks as though we're down like $6 million, and then next year, this could be right back on there, right?
I think it speaks to, we've got to have an idea of what we're doing. And in this case, I'm going to suggest we don't have that idea, so any number we put on there, we don't know what number we might get in terms of reimbursement or what the possible options are. So it'd be premature, I think, to put something on there.
But it was on here.
What was the process that it got on here?
Right.
It was just willy-nilly, just put $5 million on here? I mean, what was the process that someone thought $5 million should be put on here for beach area flood protection? Because the beach area is probably looking for some flood protection, and now we're basically saying we're not going to do it.
And see, that's where I disagree, from a standpoint that we've got significant studies going on. We've got, Mr. Carey is doing some public hearings now in terms of what we're doing in terms of raising dike levels. Certainly the tide gates are part of that. We certainly have looked at and will continue to look at raising the dike levels in the past, but you've got to have something that makes sense. You've got to have some definition of a project. You've got to have something that we are trying to accomplish.
But I guess
And I agree with that, too.
Yeah.
But what was the process to get it on here in the first place? And what was the scope of the project going to be? Like, how did it get on here? How did we get an estimate for some number to be on here for $5 million? And now, there's got to be a rationale for how it gets on, and then a really good rationale for why it comes off.
Fair enough. Joe, can you give us some background on how that got there and where that number came from?
So a couple things to provide, in the grand scheme of things, to provide flood protection to the beach area. A couple major things: you would need a barrier, some sort of wall, whether it's at Fairfield Beach Road, whether it's at Edwards, whether it's somewhere sliding there, somewhere to stop Long Island Sound from coming into the lowlands of the beach area. Once you've created that bowl, you need something to pump it out. And the third component of is if you do have a pump station there, it allows you to rework your drainage system for not just flooding events, but for the storm that we had 7 a.m. yesterday morning that had flooding in a dozen different spots. So the $5 million was a very rough estimation of those three components, with a pump station being, 2, 2, and 1, all those. But once again, just almost like a placeholder to get the idea going.
Well, and I agree with putting a placeholder in. In terms of, now we have a financial plan that doesn't include, to Mr. Becker's earlier point, some amount of number that says, hey, here's a placeholder. I mean, it's reasonable to say studies are ongoing, and this could be $5 million, it could be $10 million, it could be $2 million. But when you just remove it from a schedule, it gives you kind of a false positive, right? I mean, you're going to have to do something, right?
Unless they determine there isn't
Right.
something.
I mean,
Well,
And I'm not hearing that.
And also, you need to be able to do something that is permissible under deep regulations.
I totally get that. So, but that's not what I'm hearing. That's why not, it's off the schedule. Mr. Brown?
It's off the schedule because you don't have any idea what it's going to cost. Is that correct?
Correct. Like I said, it's order of magnitude. The three components that decide a 2 plus a 2 plus a 1. It's, yeah, there are studies in progress, which will advance the ball down the road. But once again, it's also, if the community will support it. In some of the meetings we've had, there's been some aggressive, the town must do something about flooding.
Oh, I know there is.
And then there's the on the contrary, that that
Yeah, but if
anything
it-
that's done should not obstruct the accessibility to the beach, the views, the breezes from the beach.
Yeah, but in fairness, if we were going to vet all these projects on here, there's a lot of them that are going to be, there's going to be some degree of, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, or somebody's going to be upset at one or the other. I mean, in other words, you can use that same thing over 70% of them.
Yeah, but in most of these, there's some idea also about the timing of when we do that.
Uh-huh.
And in this case, there's not.
Okay. So there's no placeholder or anything for these projects? Right.
So, are you comfortable with putting 0? Because you zeroed it out.
And once again, it was zeroed out because of the uncertainty. There's pluses and minuses to include in it or not to include in it. So it's more of a,
So how about this? When will you know? When will
Uh,
you have more information?
a couple of the studies that were going on now, they're probably 6 months from completion. We have a downtown area study. We have a pump station study. There's a Riverside Drive study, which takes us from basically the intersection of Old Post Road through basically to Beach Road over there. So a large part of it will be furthered probably before 6 months.
And with those studies being completed, there'll also be a better idea of timing of what those would be, because there are two components to this. One is having a placeholder. There are a lot of things we have going on. But second, also have some idea of timing in terms of when that would hit.
So 6 months is budget season. So it'll be right in time for budget season. We could take a look at our debt service again at that time.
And once again, we're still years away from any type of formal request for a project.
Well, this is a year's-looking document, so I'm good with that.
So,
I'm going to go to Mr. Mottola.
I was going to say, when you have an idea how much this would cost, you're going to have to determine when you're actually going to do it. It could be off the chart, this chart that we have, right? It could be in 2027, for all we know. You just don't know yet, right?
in the case of the Riverside Drive corridor study that we have a grant through, that we're running through, it's a conceptual study, and the idea is to talk to the residents and see what's feasible as far as, cost-value relationship. There might be things that we could do to correct the problem that are way outside of the cost the town would ever spend to kind of
Sure.
resolve that issue. So
Right.
until we get, buy-in from residents who say, yes, we like this plan, and yes, and it's feasible by cost and engineering, prudent engineering standards, that's when we would go from like a conceptual process to almost a design process and come back at that point where you're not just, I can give you a number plus or minus 100%, but that's not really good for planning purposes.
No,
You
but right
want-
now, you got $6 million that you're not getting within this 10-year plan.
It's hard to get
Mr.
stuff
Chair, if I may interrupt a little bit. I'd like to go back to the way this meeting was introduced. This is a capital projects work study, it's a planning session, it's a discussion item. We're talking about a project. The purpose here is not to say, oh my God, that should be on there, oh my God, that shouldn't be on there. The purpose is to see where we are, where the trends are, what we're looking at, and to have a discussion about these issues. This particular project, if you look at the pluses, the minuses, the unknowns, the costs, potential, the unknowns, reimbursement unknowns, the deep unknowns, it doesn't belong on the schedule. It shouldn't have been on the schedule last year. It was. But I think we're getting away from the purpose of the meeting here.
I
think
disagree.
that discussing an item and getting more information, and I don't think it belongs during the budget session, but discussing an item, we look at this document at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, and the there will be more information and more thoughts when this comes in, like in 6 months. If the board decides to look at this again in February, like they did last year, or this year, but last fiscal year, then there'll be more information, but.
We're not getting away from the purpose of the meeting, because one of the purposes of the meeting is to make sure that what we have in front of us is complete based on best available information. When you have a $6 million adjustment downwards from something that was on a schedule and then deemed to be taken off because you don't have good enough information to include it, maybe it shouldn't have been included on the prior schedule.
That's
Right.
what I just said, yes.
So what we're trying to understand is, why did $6 million disappear and give us a false positive on the financial condition, particularly when we're looking at the WPCA, which is going in a bad direction to the tune of $32 million over the next 10 years. So I think it's perfectly relevant to the meeting to understand how the schedule was put together, what the assumptions are, what's on the schedule, what's not on the schedule, and how those decisions were made. That's it.
But I don't
Can't
think you can
disagree
say
with what you just said.
I don't think you can say this is a false positive. They don't know how much it's going to cost.
I understand, but your debt, now you don't have anything in there for it.
Because they don't know what it's going to cost. They don't know. That's what they said.
But the number was there last year. All I'm saying is your false positive is a reduction
So if the
in
number
your
was maybe
expense.
incorrect a year or two ago, should we keep it on just for the fact of keeping it on?
Actually, what you should do is highlight the fact that you took it off, you don't know what it's going to cost, and it's going to be,
That's what they just said.
no,
That's what
we
I
had to
heard.
bring it out.
The Board of Ed put together, I believe, a new document this year that projects out some projects for us to think about, correct? I think, is it 10 years, beyond 10 years, just placeholders that we should be thinking about. Perhaps we should be doing the same thing
I agree with
on the
that.
town side.
I agree with that very much. Mr. DeWitt, you had your hand up, and then I want to go, if it's on this topic, I want to stay on this topic, and then Mr. Walsh has been patient going back, so go right ahead.
It's a question of the process. How often are the department heads requested to update this data?
It's either annual, it's an annual event, September.
July and
And
August.
and-
So that's
and
what I
then
thought.
we start in July. Last year, we looked at it in February as well. I'm not exactly sure why, but we did.
Well, but that's my point. It's an annual event.
Yeah,
So once
at
a
a
year, the
minimum.
department heads look at it and update it. But yet you
Right.
just said, well, let's look at it in 6 months.
No,
6
what I
months
s-
won't change.
No, what I said was that last year, we also looked at it in February. And in fact, I remember why we looked at it,
But it
yes,
doesn't
we.
change is my
Yeah,
point.
you.
Yeah, right.
And the department heads, when you say we, no, that's, I remember now, we looked at it with respect to the non-recurring vote. We vote January, February on non-recurring projects. When we look at non-recurring projects, we look at it in line with the capital planning. We update all the records, and we do a change from February to September. All right? At that time, the department heads look at that as well. So the time to look at this again would be in the non-recurring projects.
Great, which would just be about budget season, February, so.
Cool.
Okay.
Mr. Tiniak, on this topic.
Yeah, real
right?
quick, to Mr. Michelangelo. In the springtime with the WPCA, did we apply for a grant through OPM for $2 million, which would, I think it would have covered some of this beach flooding issues, if I remember the discussion right?
No, that grant was for our East Trunk Line project, which is identified in the capital plan, in the WPCA capital plan. So that's the East Trunk Line issue, not associated with beach flooding.
I thought this was to alleviate some of the beach flooding as well at the time that was brought up. No?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Tiniak.
On this topic.
On this
just-
topic, and
we
then you
talked a
have
lot
the
about the
formula.
$5 million. I want to talk about the $1 million, this downtown drainage improvement project. Tell me about that. Why do you want to pull that off now? Same reasons? You just don't have cost figures, or do we no longer have a downtown drainage problem? Because I know a lot of the merchants still think we do
Correct.
during heavy rains.
Yes, we do, and once again, through a community development block grant, DR grant for, yep. So that's, I'm just looking for the amount, was it a couple $100,000? Okay, so we have, one of the things about the downtown area
Yep.
being flat and highly impervious, we're getting close to 100% of the water running off, and it basically peaks instantaneously. So one of the things we'd like to do in theory is to see if we can make a dent in the peak runoff that we get and get the whole downtown area to a proposed pump station. So that, once again, that's out there. So, I don't think there's, maybe there's not a right or wrong answer, but if you include it, it's almost, the question is how much of a certainty does a project have to be on the chart? Does it have to be a 30% or a 50 or a 70% to make it on here? So that's something that we never discussed. What probability does it need to be? How imminent does it need to be? How good do the numbers need to be before it gets on there? But that's the status of the project. So whether it should be on or shouldn't be on.
But is there any study, the other one you mentioned there, you were waiting for some studies and things to be done and talking to neighbors, and there's a process, and that seems like it's going to take a while, whatever. In this one, is this different? Are there studies being done? Are we waiting for studies to come back on the downtown drainage problem?
Correct. We have an engineering firm, Mylone McBroom, who is doing that for us as we speak. And once again, the answer will be, well, first of all, what could we do?
Mm-hmm.
Can we make it a dent in it? Can we improve it? How do we improve it? And then you start putting conceptual numbers to it before you even have a design. You sort of have to frame the question before you come to an engineering project or solution.
When do we expect those studies to be back and you guys to have some type of, ability to at least make decisions? Because is that a neighborhood decision too, or as much as the beach thing?
Yeah, obviously we vetted out, and all of them. We got 4 grants that came before you guys.
Yes.
Maybe 6 months ago. So we probably got, and they're all initiated. So we probably got another 6 months until they're completed.
Okay.
So.
Okay. My concern with some of these, and I understand some of your limitations on being able to either put numbers on them, waiting for studies to even decide what needs to be done and things like that, is that once this money is removed out of here, it's harder to put back in.
Right.
Because those slots start getting by the administration for other things.
Actually, that's not the case. I mean, we look at this every year, and especially in the out years, when you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years out, whatever we deem appropriate based on best available information, we will put in there.
All right. So you wouldn't have a problem putting $6 million worth of projects in if you get the studies back and they can come up with a solution for next year?
That would be the way we would do it.
Okay.
And just to address an earlier question, are we taking things out to stay under the 10%? And 2 earlier questions, and one, somebody mentioned
we
that
asked and
we're
answered.
hiding this, is, you have this schedule. The reason it's brought to your attention is because we prepared the schedule, which we showed you. It's right there in the middle of the schedule. The second thing is, this project would take place in fiscal year '21, so the first debt service payment would be fiscal year '22, and that would only be half of a year. So it really impacts fiscal year '23, where our number is 8%. So it's not
But
going...
but that's fair, but we also have the WPCA.
But we knew we had the WPCA, which is,
not on
I struggled over whether to put it in or take it out, or, when I put in, take out, what I mean is combine it
I know
or
what you
show
mean.
it separately.
Consolidate it.
Consolidate it, thank you, yes. I decided it'd be easier to see it first time if it was separated, and we could discuss it, which is the purpose.
Any other questions? Mr. Walsh, you wanted a couple things on the tide gates.
Yes. Only because, Brian, when I looked through them, obviously you're going through some plan here, because there's tide gates all over the place popping up, and some of them are $1 million plus. And to me, just roughly, it looks like about $3 million worth of tide gates. And that's based on that study you were just holding up.
Yeah, so I commissioned a study back in March, because after looking through all of these things, everything is in, different stages of need. And so I basically had a structural engineering firm come in and look at all of them and put together, basically estimates for repair and conceptual design to repair a lot of these things. Turney Creek over Riverside Drive, that's original infrastructure since 1973, so there was pretty immediate need to get that on the capital improvement project list. So I had that study done. It's got costs plus or minus 10%, so they're really nailed them down. And it was, appropriate, basically to kind of rework some of the stuff that had been being proposed by my department in past years to kind of adjust it to meet, critical needs that should be dealt with, in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So that's what the plan, and, I didn't want to, I'll hand this out in the future. You can see that it's methodically laid out, and, it's basically providing all that information.
You mentioned ones from 1973. Are these all based on age? Or are they damaged because of Sandy or some other flooding, or a combination of all things? Yeah.
The department, along with Public Works, has over the years made, small improvements just to keep systems working, but, most of them are corrugated metal culverts that are past their useful life, and, they just need to be replaced.
Once this series of these tide gates that are on here are done, will we be good with tide gates for a while?
We should be, again, but, it's going to be ongoing 30-year replacement schedule. Now a lot of the culverts that are being put in are not metal, so they don't corrode as much. We use, high-density polyethylene, type of, pipes. And, this is basically a feasibility study to replace everything. When we get, the cost is obviously in there for design, we will look at, engineering value analysis to see if there's ways to do it better, cheaper, and provide the same type of, service life and resiliency that we have out there now.
And just give me some sense. There seems to be like three major ones here, maybe a fourth one. But are how many do we totally have in the town?
Functioning right now, there's 9.
Okay.
So the critical one really is Riverside Drive, Turney Creek, and then past that, I mean, they're all critical, but the ones that need immediate work is Riverside Drive, Turney Creek. There's been some issues with subsidence of the road there that's being caused by the pipes. That's a major, it's a major road. And there's a lot of infrastructure as far as utilities that are laid over that road. So it's not something that could be let go another, 5, 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this schedule? Mr. DeWitt?
More of a comment than a question. It's a little disconcerting to hear Mr. Michelangelo, say that there's no criteria given to a department head like yourself as to when a project comes on or off. So, I'm more inclined to think, if I'm you, and I think I need $5 million in 2020, man, I'm keeping that in there. And then I'm a hero next year when I reduce it to $4 million or move it out. So, that's just me. But maybe.
And I meant there's no quantitative criteria. It's somewhat subjective. When is a viable project?
Well, right. And by
enough of
virtue
a
of the
certain
fact
thing.
that it's subjective, ad hoc, right? So maybe we need some guidelines for this process, with on, off, I don't know.
Thank you.
Great. I'll form a committee, we'll see. I did form.
No, I don't think so. I think we can just define it. Remember what the purpose of this is. It's for long-term financial planning. Be conservative with it, so we don't get surprised. All right. Are we done with that schedule?
I had one question regarding
Sure.
the ladder truck. Is the chief here?
Yeah, he is.
Chief, is the ladder truck that's there, is that just being basically moved up by 1 year and half the payments being?
Thank you,
We're splitting up into two payment years? Is that what's really going on? Okay.
Yeah, $1.2 million.
Yep, 1.2. I saw that in one of the.
One half of the payment was moved up, so the payment in 2020, 2021 stayed.
Yes, yep.
And
Yeah,
the
that's what I thought.
21-22 was moved up a year earlier
Okay.
than that other payment. So
Okay.
it's 1920, 2021.
And the reason for that ladder truck being moved up a year, is it based on mileage, or is it based on something else?
It's the condition of the vehicle.
Okay.
And its projected lifespan. We are working to ensure that it will be a reliable reserve once the new ladder truck is purchased. But given its current condition and the wear and tear, indicates an earlier replacement by 1 year.
Okay. And in regards to the ladder trucks, do we only have one full ladder, or we still?
That's correct.
One full ladder, and then we have this rescue truck, which is also a ladder truck.
So what we have is a full-size ladder truck,
Yeah.
and what's in the waterfall is a replacement of that.
Yes.
We have, what we replaced, ladder one on Reef Road
Yeah.
was with the rescue truck that we talked about previously.
Mm-hmm.
We converted the budget for engine 5 to, at 600,000. We increased the funding to 900,000, and are currently prepared to go to contract for the construction of a Quint, which will give us less than a full-size ladder, but it will give us ladder capability.
Okay.
And we talked about that at the
Yeah.
last year's budget.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right,
To
Mr.
fire.
Becker?
Yeah, so when you were here, either during budget or probably right around the same time when you came forward with the Quint, there was discussion about bringing forward some plans or really just options, be it leasing or putting, into the budget a certain amount, I mean, sort of that long term. Have we gotten any progress? We talked about kind of following up at Capital Summit on that with the trucks. So for instance, we've done this with the DPW vehicles, we've done this with the police department vehicles, the fire trucks, essentially are, and every other averaged out to a number, and by bonding that number, we were going to look at kind of this, whether or not it made sense to start creeping that into the budget and saying every year you've got an amount and you can buy a truck, or you can, take 2 years and buy a ladder, but how that sort of looked. And you had mentioned leasing and some other things you wanted to look at and kind of look at that holistically and come back to us. So
We haven't done any significant or substantial work to get to that point at this point.
do we think maybe by budget perhaps? I mean, I can tell you that's the next period when I'll bring it up. I bring it twice a year. One's in budget and then one's a capital. Because obviously a budget, we talk about how your budget is made up and moving these trucks and whatnot in, and then capital, we see them kind of spread out through all these years. So that's still 6 months.
We're glad to have
if
that
possible.
conversation with Mr. Mayor and Mr. Tetro to address that issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did want to comment, next week, we are
I was
coming
just going to announce
at
that.
7 o'clock, okay.
Yeah, we are, the chief has agreed to bring the newest apparatus to our meeting next week. So at 7 p.m., prior to the formal start of our meeting, we're going to have our own version of Touch-A-Truck. And we're going to get to see actually the latest
No balloons,
truck.
no balloons,
No
no,
balloons. No little teddy bears or anything like that. We get abused. But, so, feel free, we're going to do that at 7 o'clock in next week's meeting. I want to thank the chief, and I want to thank Mr. Walsh for coming up with that idea. I thought that was an excellent idea, so thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for that. If we're done with that schedule, what I'd like to do at this point is turn it over to our education friends and go through kind of the same thing with
Can
what
I
they've
do-
done on their facilities
Can I
plan.
make a comment as we do it, because it's a
Yeah.
perfect transition? I think, I like this Exhibit 3 a lot. I
Yep.
think it just helps us to see what the changes from one capital meeting to the next. And I think it would be handy if the Board of Ed did the same thing. And I know Mr. Cullen prepared a memorandum which kind of showed you where that was dated August 4th, that was in our packet, that had a summary of the updates. But if, to the extent that the board could do a similar schedule, it would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I agree with that comment. Can we, with that, I do want to turn to the memo, and I want to turn it over to Dr. Tracy, and, let's step through it. We don't need to go through it ad nauseum detail, but let's make sure we understand what's going on there. Go right ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. It's been my privilege for the last couple of months to serve as the interim superintendent of schools here in Fairfield, and I'll be with you until December when our newly appointed superintendent, Dr. Tony Jones, arrives officially.
You kind of sound like a quarterback for the Cleveland Browns at this point, right?
Yeah, where's Johnny Manziel? Where he really is. And I also wanted to thank Mr. Cullen, who, along with his team, have actually done the work over the years to develop these numbers in these exhibits. I want to just give you some highlights, and then Tom is with us to answer any particular questions that you might have.
Come on up, Mr. Cullen. Feel free, we've got another chair there. And thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for the work.
Good, thanks, Tom. As with the town's plan, the school board's plan extends out over the next 10 years through 25, 26. A number of changes have been made to that plan since you all saw it last year. Some have to do with changes in timing, and others have to do with changes in scope. And let me just highlight those for you. With respect to timing, Phase 3 of the Sherman School project has been moved up under this plan from 2021 to 18-19. And second, the artificial turf replacement at Fairfield Ward High School has been moved up from 2018-19 to 2017-18. And then a number of changes in scope, totaling about $11 million over the 10-year life of the plan, as follows. These are the major pieces. Fairfield Ludlow High School window replacement, I think you're familiar with that. Second, significant work at the Holland Hill School. We learned some lessons from the work that was completed recently at Fairfield Ludlow High School and also at Mill Hill School that has caused us to put additional dollars against security upgrades, exterior site work, FF&E expenses, and also lockers. Plus, Holland Hill now has the addition of 2 portable classrooms. With respect to Mill Hill, the plan now calls for separate project initial funding, similar to what was done at Holland Hill, to have some dollars earlier in the schedule to do initial project planning. And so there's an additional cost for that. Fourth, we have air conditioning of the cafeteria at Fairfield Ward High School, tennis courts at both of the high schools. We have security infrastructure, a Phase 3 added in the 2018-19 year. And finally, the HVAC rooftop unit that has been added to the 2017-18 year that has turned into quite a substantial project that requires reaching in over the building with a major piece of equipment. So those are the highlights. Of course, Tom and I stand ready, along with the board, to work with you to integrate our numbers with your numbers and to collaborate on staying within that 10% target that you all have established. Tom, did you want to add anything to what I just said, or we'll just take questions?
Oh, I think that's very good.
It's good because he told me all this stuff.
He also had you add $11 million into the budget, and you're 3 months on the job.
Over 10 years, Mr. Chairman, over 10 years.
Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
Dr. Tracy, thank you for being here. It's nice to meet you finally. But I'm very happy to see that the Sherman Elementary Phase 3 project, which this board has known about to finish up that project, has been moved up. I think it needs to be moved up. What was a couple of these things that you moved up, did you lose something off of your schedule that freed up some money to allow you to move it up?
Tom, can you?
No, we didn't.
Did you lose or move?
We just moved. We moved things up based on the need, deterioration.
So you didn't have to move anything back because of that, or
Did not at this
lose
time.
a project or
The
anything
only
else
thing
like
we
that?
did do, and Dr. Tito was here, is we looked at the way we do our waterfalls. We break down the funding needed per year. We've noticed that we were overestimating the amount needed that first year. So if a project is, say, 15 million, the first year we were figuring about 750,000 for a project team, initial work getting started. The next year was the big bulk of the project, 8-9 million being spent. We're seeing that that's a little bit less as we draw down and work with the town. So we were able to adjust some of those on the larger projects, which might have helped a little bit.
And that Phase 3 has no effect regarding any of the FEMA numbers and how much we can spend on the building and all that other stuff?
Right, that's still in effect, but it's 2% of the overall value of the property.
Good. Good. Well, I think it's great that that's
Yeah,
moved up.
just to be clear, the FEMA guidelines still have to be followed. This project fits within them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Timniak, did you have something?
Yeah, does the Phase 3 at Sherman include air conditioning?
Yes.
Can we get a brief update? And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but one of the things that's impacted our ability to get projects done in the past has been the state of current projects and cost overruns on those projects, pushing things back and moving. You referred to the Ludlow windows, which many of us has lived for the last decade under. So we've got several projects ongoing right now. Do we have any information on any of those projects that would have bearing on these schedules at this point?
Well, forgive me for bringing it up again, but certainly the Ludlow project had
Yeah.
a significant overrun as part of that.
What do we know about Holland Hill? Anything at this point?
There are no numbers that I've been, that have come out of the Holland Hill project. There are some concerns in the sense that the one diagram I saw showing the planned improvements seemed to indicate about a 50% increase in the total square footage of the building, which seemed to be a much more dramatic improvement than what we had been anticipating. So my comments to the building committee would please get some numbers on that and get back to both the Board of Selectmen as well as the other boards with an update so we know where we are.
And when's that due? Do you know?
I don't have a date at this time.
But they're working on that currently?
Correct.
Okay. Any other projects that are ongoing that we're having problems with, Tom, that are material in nature? Or?
Can only mention good news.
Okay, well, give us some good news.
A lot of the non-recurring projects have come in under budget. Things like the Fairfield Woods Middle School roof.
Okay.
By bidding that aggressively, we've got some really good numbers. The boilers at Ludlow High School that happened this summer, which needed also a large crane. Very good numbers.
What's going on at Osborne Hill with the corridor and that?
That's being rebid.
Okay.
This will be the third time now to try and aggressively get better numbers, and reached out to more contractors so we'd get better coverage.
Okay. And no surprises on Riverfield? Everything's...
No.
Okay. Any other questions for our colleagues from the Board of Education while we have them here? Mary,
Mr. Flynn?
Chris? Go ahead, Ms.
I just
Meyer.
have a question on the security in the schools. Can you generically talk, I saw that under every school that you're going to be adding something. You don't have to tell me what, but are these things that have come up recently that you feel that you need to add to what was already proposed in the 2-year plan?
If you're mentioning the security upgrades that are in this facility plan, those generally were smaller type items related to cameras and door systems. But we've learned a lot and have done a lot since we did the Riverfield renovation, where we actually develop a security vestibule type system when visitors approach the building and actually get into the building. That's substantially adding some cost to Riverfield project and to future projects where we want to try and do that, and working with the Fairfield Police Department. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail about other things we're doing publicly.
Let me just comment. We were benefited greatly by the police department putting together a thoughtful plan on what we should do with security. In the roughly $3.5 million package that was brought forward, we selected, and actually the police department selected, but we concurred on the highest priority. We didn't do everything that they recommended, but the highest priority within that 3.5. I'm sure that as we are able to have security infrastructure improvements in the outlying years beyond the 3.5, we'll pick off some of those other items that may have been in that report.
So I guess just as a follow-up, are these specific items you're looking at that you're budgeting for, that 500,000, or is it a placeholder for what you're thinking you might need based on what you've learned?
At this time and today's date, there are specific items.
All set? Any other questions? Mr. Becker, and then I'll go to Mr. Timniak.
Okay. So, one thing that's more recent, and certainly understand if you don't have a lot of information, but the recent ruling in regards to the recent judicial decision and sort of how that may impact a community like ours and the reimbursements? Have you begun factoring, I mean, the potential of that in? Because obviously we rely upon, I think, a lot of reimbursement money, particularly on these large projects, that if it were to go away or be reduced, would certainly have a cascading effect all the way through the waterfall. And you guys, with a lot of these big projects, certainly take up a very big chunk of that. So that's probably not an easy
I would have
thing,
to
but
wait for the
it's-
chairman to say he wants to wade into that discussion at the capital planning
Just-
workshop meeting.
I just, how it
So I'll make a
pertains,
couple
so.
of brief comments.
Wasn't that the decision more about the educational cost sharing, not as much regards to the reimbursement of capital items?
Well,
They mentioned it.
Well, the
The,
judge mentioned that he thought
however,
it was ridiculous that
Mr.
they
Walsh
gave
is
$2 billion.
correct that the central question that the judge was answering is whether the state's method of allocating its funds to various districts around the state was adequate and it was rational. He made an ancillary comment as part of his opinion about the state spending $1 billion a year on capital, but only $2 billion a year on operating. And there are some comments that the judge included in his opinion that may, according to the Attorney General, had gone beyond the scope of the trial. It's too early at this point to know what the state is going to do. I mean, they've filed an official appeal. Who knows what the Supreme Court will do? So,
But the one piece that might be relevant in terms of what we're doing here, I believe, coming out of the last budget that was passed by the state, the reimbursement percentage for Fairfield was changed from
out of the last
27
budget?
27 to 25% on capital projects.
Oh, Tom?
I don't know the exact number, but it was very small. It's somewhere around 25.67% that Fairfield gets.
Okay, and is that incorporated into the waterfall chart in terms of planned reimbursements? So we're
Yes.
using the best available information on that.
Yes.
But to Mr. Becker's point, and I think this is overall, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're operating with a state that's under some amount of financial distress, and they have shown by their actions in the past 12 months or so, they consider us a wealthy community that needs less help, correct? So that we don't know what's going to happen with this reimbursement process as we move forward and start trying to do these projects. Is that a fair statement?
I think it's a fair statement on two counts. One, the overall financial circumstance of the state.
Right.
And the judge's decision. They're both interplaying there.
Right. So thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Becker, because it's something to be cognizant of, because it'll impact our ability to fund these things.
Yep. And just from a timing standpoint, I believe the judge's decision is going to be appealed by the Attorney General, so it may be a little bit longer than the 180 days plan before we have those answers back.
In fact, I think the Supreme Court just announced today that they've accepted that appeal and that they will hear it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you very much for all the hard work and effort and everything.
I had one quick thing.
Oh, Mr. Timniak, my apologies, I forgot.
Real quick, while you're here, on page 10 of the book, it says Sherman Elementary School. Are all those listed under the renovation and addition? Is that all included for Phase 3?
I'm going to say yes before I look at the page, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, actually, it's page 10 lists it verbally, but there's another page you can look at that gives you the detail.
It goes
Page 29
Page 29 as well.
gives you a breakdown.
Okay, so I guess I'll get here. All right, so this is all Phase 3 then on page 29?
Yes.
And that $3 million number is your most up-to-date and accurate?
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Timniak, thank you. Once again, thank you very much. Before you guys leave, I'm going to turn our attention to exhibit number 4. Okay, we didn't go in order here, and that was intentional. This, remember, is the by project breakdown of approval and then cash flow. We looked at this at kind of the summary level on exhibit number 1. We've discussed a lot of the moves and shifts in addition to the projects in our most recent discussion, so this is really a summary of that, but I want to give everybody the opportunity to just flip through it, and if there's any questions.
And
Mike,
while
to
there
the
are
public.
questions, Dr. Tracy did take a quick look at our numbers on our sheet and tying into your earlier question on Bob's sheet and said, yes, year over year, they tie in.
Excellent, thank you very
On
much, I
your
appreciate
Exhibit
that.
1, Exhibit 1.
Thank you, yes, thank you, Dr. Tracy, thank you, Mr. Dwyer.
Mr. Because I hate to see this evening end, I have a question. There's been a couple of requests regarding incorporating the WPCA into the waterfall.
Yeah,
Would you like us to try to get this done, so while it's all fresh in our mind, maybe put it on next week's agenda?
that'd be excellent, thank
We'll
you,
give that a go.
thank you. Mr. DeWitt, did you have a question on the schedule?
Yeah, Exhibit 4, yes. So, page 1, lower left-hand corner. Anticipated expenditures. Those are actual expenditures, no? Or is there still something that hasn't executed in the 2015, 2016 budget?
That would be correct.
Actual. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Walsh?
Same first page of Exhibit 4, the middle column, under where it says capital. The clubhouse renovation, are we going to be expecting to see some funding mechanism or some proposal coming forward in, I guess, this year? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any idea when? Will it be after the holidays?
Probably sometime between now and the end of the year.
Now and the end of the year? Okay. Great.
Thank you. Any other questions on Exhibit 4? Seeing none, we're going to move into the waterfall itself, which is Exhibit 5. Now, this is a schedule that we're familiar with. We look at repeatedly throughout the course of the year, and certainly at budget time.
Mr. Flynn, if I can interrupt for one moment, do you need us for the rest of the exhibits, or?
You can, does
'Cause if
anybody
you
have
do,
any
we'll stay,
questions? No, thank you. Does anybody have any burning questions for the Board of Education? Seeing none, class dismissed.
No, I would point out, Dr. Tracy, that since you won't be here next year at this time, if you leave, you'll miss the rest of this.
Maybe I'll consider that a standing invitation.
Absolutely.
But it is on Fair TV, so he can
We
tune
are
it in.
open to the public. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and it's nice to meet you, Dr. Tracy, and good luck to you during your tenure. And I think we'll see you next week, absolutely. All right, so exhibit number 5, the waterfall. Does anybody have any questions on this? I want to be clear to Mr. Mayor's recent statement just about 2 minutes ago. This does not presently include the impact of the WPCA capital plan, which we'll briefly go through after this. I mean, we've gone through it, but I want to make sure we're there. Does anybody have any questions on this right now? Mr. Mayor, this incorporates everything else we've talked about this evening except WPCA. Is that a true statement?
Correct.
Okay, anybody on the waterfall? Okay. Thank you for that. And this also includes the most recent impact of the refinance in that situation, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's go to WPCA capital items. Unfortunately, it looks like Mr. Michelangelo left. We talked about this. This is the first time. I want to thank you for having this put together. We should discuss how we incorporate this moving forward in the overall financial documents. Mr. Tetro or Mr. Timniak, who serves on the WPCA, any idea when they're going to be ready to actually come before us and talk about, we're not asking them for the proposal for the 32 million, but we've heard about, you know, this massive renovation or rebuild or new project that needs to be done over the next 10 to 15 years. We've heard about it for quite some time. When can we get some hard information on this that we can start to assimilate?
I can bring it back to the committee. I don't remember hearing anything, and I did not attend the last meeting they had. The last one I attended, we were approving permits for Fairfield U. And I think we ended up missing the August meeting as well. So I don't have a specific detail on when they can expect to come back. I will look into that. Yeah, absolutely, of
please.
course.
We can gather that information and bring it next week.
Yep, there's also a study going on, because we had, part of our last discussion here when we talked about how to divide up costs was about
Yes.
funding a study. So there are two different projects going on that we've referenced here tonight. One is the study, so I think that part of the issue might be finishing that study so they know what the timing is and everything on that. Though they might have a better idea, and Chris, I'll leave that to you to sort out, but.
And by the way,
second-
I'm not trying to push it. I mean, that's perfectly fine. If they need a few months to get this ready, whatever that is.
I think it would
That's
be a
fine.
more valuable discussion, both in terms of order or magnitude of costs as well as timing, when that study's done.
Absolutely.
All right, since this is the biggest WPCA project we've done since in 20 years or so, I would suggest it's not fair to the volunteers on the board to ask them to make those projections without some support for that.
Agreed.
Second, the other point reference was a $2 million, application we're having for a state grant to do that east trunk line in renovation, but that was not the study, that was literally the rebuilding of that line.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr.
I was going to say, I remember the last time we just had a general overview of the topic. We talked about the study. I don't remember any specific timeline which was presented at that, nor was I thinking down the line when we were going to be approving it.
Yeah, I
can't
guess,
go, so.
and my point on this is, we've heard about it for so long, we're waiting for a presentation. We don't want to front-run the presentation, and we want it to be a presentation that they're comfortable with. So, get your study done, get the information that the board feels comfortable with, and then just please bring it back, because it is such a big number, and we do need to start thinking about putting it into these projections, as well as how we're going to finance it overall for the town.
It is going to be a big number.
Yeah.
I can.
And certainly is, now that Mr. Mayor's been able to include the WPCA projections in this, it's something that we have a placeholder for.
We actually
And we'll be-
don't in a lot of them.
And we'll be in front of this board at all times. Well, we'll have a placeholder next week when it combines it.
Exactly. Okay. Anything else on this? So, the follow-up items. Consolidation of WPCA and that. Some follow-ups on some of the items that were left off of here. Mr. Becker, you're going to look at certain things that you think were not included. I think we need to talk about and provide greater clarity on what should be on the schedule. I was disappointed. The only shock and surprise tonight was that there was $6 million taken off. I would be conservative in financial documents, and I would put a number there, and I would point to the number and say, this is the number that's there. We don't know whether it's going to hold, but we want to keep something in here moving forward, because who knows what's going to happen in the next 10 years, and it's particularly in the last 5
Yeah,
years.
and obviously, I got a little distressed with that conversation going on, and, finger pointing kind of that was going on, why is it
No
not
finger
there?
pointing.
It's how I interpret it. If I interpret it incorrectly, I apologize. But, as Joe pointed out, and I think as Mr. Tetra pointed out, there's so many variables with respect to whether we're going to do it, whether we're not going to do it. If we do it, will there be reimbursement? So if you put the placeholder in there, do you put a reimbursement in there that equals the placeholder? Then it has a zero impact? You know what I'm saying? Or do you put like zero? There's
No.
there's so many variables, and so when we started looking at this number, the number is easy to put in, but then, okay, what's the reimbursement? When is it going to happen? And when we started looking at the number, we realized there was so much we didn't know, we took it out.
So Mr. DeWitt's point, I think, is valid. Put in the $5 million, get $4 million in reimbursement, come back with $1 million, look like a hero, and go out for a nice dinner, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, that's an approach.
yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, any other questions, comments, concerns on this process, on how we ended up, on where we're going?
I think this was a good meeting. I want to thank Bob for putting together all these exhibits. I thought the index helped me out in my preparation coming in here, and appreciate it. It was a good conversation today.
Thanks. Anybody else? I want to thank everyone for being here.
I'd just like to, sometimes when I look at this, as I go through it, there's the non-recurring portion, and the administration puts together numbers, and the Board of Education puts together numbers on what the non-recurring portion is. And then we end this conversation, and then we're here in February or March, or whenever we have the non-recurring conversation, and we're going through it again. And then people are asking questions, and the people who are asking the questions are like, well, that was on the numbers we did back at your capital planning session. So why are you surprised by it?
True.
It would almost seem better if there's a way to somehow combine the two, where the same night we do this, we maybe go approve the non-recurring. This way, we're only looking at it one time. And then this way, when we're really dealing with real numbers.
I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that.
Okay.
I don't know that I agree, and this is my own personal preference. I don't know that I agree that we should turn this meeting into looking at specific projects and approving them, because that's not what we were trying to do. This was to be more of a global, how do we finance things, where do we look like we're going, what do the milestones look like, which is why, by the way, I would be more conservative and put in like the $6 million and stuff like that and say, this is what the biggest number looks like based on best available information, right? That's where I thought you were going with that, which I would completely agree with, is this would be, and probably is better served, to be the venue where we discuss what should be an operating budget versus what should be in capital, and the definition of that. And we didn't do that this year, and maybe that's something that next year we ought to do, and have that discussion here as opposed to have those discussions during the budget process, because it always seems like we get wrapped around the maypole over, paving and trucks and all this, and maybe we should take that out of the budgeting discussion and put that into the capital planning discussion.
Yeah, I think those are, Mr. Chair, if I might, worthwhile discussions, but separate.
Yep.
I think the focus of tonight, as it's evolved, was to make sure that everybody has a kind of a vision for what's coming down the road. It may come at different times, and it may come in different shapes and sizes, but it's, here's what's coming, here's what we planned out, and if all this happens, here's what the impact is.
Yep.
Even though we know, the planning for the next 5 years is probably the best we can do, and certainly when you get 5 to 10 or 10 plus out, that the numbers all are highly changeable or flexible in those terms.
At least timing-wise.
But I think that to have the other discussions, be it, as you were talking about, what we put in the budget or don't, I think that's a separate discussion.
I think it's separate, but I think it's relevant for the conversation of capital items.
Oh, that's what you're talking about, but I mean,
Yeah.
we still want to have, if you have it after this workshop, that would make sense, because then we have a picture of what's going on.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Becker?
And to your point, thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Chairman, because, just on my end, particularly on all the trucks, and we've gotten the DPW moving in the right direction, but during budget, it's sort of talked about it during capital, and during capital, it's sort of talked about during budget.
Yeah,
so
we kinda
maybe
go
it's
circle.
that, for me, for me on that particular issue, there's a lot of buy-in, we've done it in a lot of other places, but it does sort of, that circle, and maybe it's that interim period, and maybe we do it there, but there's got to be a place where we just settle up and go, hey, it makes sense or it doesn't. Now, this particular one, the chief's going to come back with some stuff. Maybe he can come back with it in 3 months instead of 6 months or whatever, but it would be helpful to have that.
Bringing the fire trucks, exactly what, I was a little bit confused.
Put 'em
It's
into the operating
either very
budget.
simple or it's not.
Put them into the operating, the question is, you put them into the operating budget at $300,000 a year and just use that fund when you need to buy a $900,000 truck, buy it in year 3 with the
Yeah,
accumulation.
and that doesn't require a lot of work, it requires a decision.
Right.
Pretty much. And some towns, it's done every way from, as the chief said,
Yeah.
from leasing to
Yeah, I
bonding
thought it
to
was
just
more than that, that's all.
just dropping it in for 600 one year or not, to doing a fund that does it that way. There's so many different, all
Yeah.
towns do it. I've just brought up that when I looked at it, and it's almost every other year at about a half, now it's about 600, that you're essentially in that same sort of circle that we've tried to get away from with a lot of stuff, where if you looked at the bonded inside of every, slice it up in every budget, we're just paying interest on something that we could probably phase, in, so.
Yeah, the only comment I make on that is I understand the whole concept of a capital fund, if you will, a funded capital project fund. Doing that the next 2 or 3 years, though, is going to be doing it at the same time that we're tied into a lot of
Yeah.
budget pressures from the state and stuff, so.
I don't want to get into having that discussion tonight. Let's,
Yeah,
it's a
and
fair
I'm
point.
not saying
Yeah.
do it tomorrow, I'm just bringing up that
Yeah, okay.
just don't want it to go away.
Anybody else? Seeing none, do I have a motion from somebody on my board for adjournment? We're going to, Mrs. Marmee, and we'll go to Mr. Matola. All in favor of adjournment? Those opposed? Good night, everybody. See you next week. Same time, same bat channel.